Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. I have a special topic. It was requested by Frog Super. He said, can you please tell me who your top 10 magicians are? Top 10. He asked me this a long time ago, and I gave it a lot of thought. I could easily put 50 magicians in this category, 100 magicians in this category, easily. So if I know you and you know me and you're a great magician, I left you off the list, I apologize. I apologize to those in history that have had such a great impact on me, but I had to select 10. And I wanted to select the top 10 that had an impact on my life and my performance in one way or another. So that was the criteria I used. Who actually had an impact on me. So here are my top 10. Frog Super, thank you so much for asking. Number 1. And by the way, this ranking isn't necessarily in order, but it kind of is. It's in order from the person who probably had the most impact on me all the way down to the person who, well, I shouldn't even say that. I shouldn't say that. And I'll explain as I go. But the number one, George Goble. Now, many of you may not know who George Goble was. George Goble, I did a video on him, by the way. If you scroll on down, you'll see that video. Take a look. There's a biography of George Goble I highly recommend. I think it was William Rauscher. William Rauscher. So George Goble, this is George Goble, by the way. George Goble is pick number 1. Let me tell you why. So I'm 8 years old. I've already had my first magic kit. I was given a magic kit for Christmas. I learned how to do the tricks in it. I took my tricks from the magic kit to my show and tell 3rd grade class. I presented the show there, and some kid in the class got the same kit for Christmas. And so every time I did a trick, he shouted out the secret. It was humiliating, but that was my first experience as a performance magician. Well, later, here I am, a Cub Scout. Now remember, my dad was an avid magic fan, and his father, Raymond, used to use magic in his traveling sales activity to get attention. And he loved magic. My grandfather loved magic. He would come home from his sales trips and he would take his 2 kids, my Aunt Eleanor and my father, he would take them to the Blackstone Senior Show. And I grew up listening to Dad tell me about Blackstone Senior. Well, he wanted to give me that experience. George Goble was creating the Blackstone experience. I don't know if you knew that, but in the days when George Goble was doing his Grand Illusion show, there weren't Grand Illusion shows. Remember, it was Doug Henning who really brought in the revival. Prior to Doug Henning, you just didn't have that much. And so George Goble wanted to preserve the big show. And he produced a big show. I'm going to tell you about that in a minute. But that wasn't my first exposure to George Goble. I was a Cub Scout. My father was the pack master. And as pack master, he got to choose programs. And so he elected to do a magic show one night. It wasn't a blue and gold dinner. It was a regular pack meeting. And he booked none other than George Goble to come in and entertain us. Let me tell you something. I'm 8 years old. I'm a Cub Scout. I'm sitting on the floor. George Goble's entertaining. Oh my goodness. It was a show I will never forget. He did the hip-hop rabbits. I loved it. He did the razor blade trick. And even back then, this is in the 1960s, my father said, oh, I don't think you should have done the razor blade trick for kids. Kids loved it. Oh, man. Are you kidding? 8-year-old Cub Scouts, we ate that up. And George knew it. He used my dad to do the old shirt bit. You know, my dad was wearing a coat and he had a shirt and a tie. Back in the 60s, that's the way gentlemen dressed. So my dad comes up to assist him and he's doing the cut and restored rope trick, but he cuts through my father's tie. Bit of comedy there. Later he restores his tie, restores the rope. But as Dad is taking his seat, George Goble whips the shirt off his back. Hysterical. We loved it. So I remember the show. He did the vanishing bowl of water. Oh my goodness. It was a great show. I fell in love. I fell in love with George Goble. Later, I'm 11 years old now. My father takes me to see The Big Illusion Show. I don't know what high school, it was in a high school auditorium. Don't remember which one. But we went to see George in his full illusion show. Oh my goodness. What a show. He did the the levitation. I will never forget sitting there in the audience, watching that body rise. And I'll tell you what, when George whipped away that cloth, I thought I saw her body dematerialize. Now, I know in hindsight that didn't happen, but I'm telling you, at 11 years old, that's what I thought I saw. And then when he shouted and she shouted and she came running from the back of the audience, that was great theater, folks. So George Goble had an impact on me like no other magician, period. George Goble. Number 2, coming in at number 2, Doug Henning. Doug Henning, you know what? I was in high school when Doug was really hot, you know, and he was doing the television shows and all this. And I was part of a youth group. And youth group met on Friday night. And consequently, many of Doug's shows were on Friday night. So I would make a deal. You know, I would, the youth group meetings were in somebody's private home. They were normally in the basement. And I said, listen, I'll come to youth meeting, but I want to sneak upstairs and watch Doug Henning. Will you let me watch Doug Henning? They made special accommodations for me because they knew I was that passionate about magic, even in high school. So I'd come over, I'd go downstairs for the youth meeting. We'd have our songs, we'd be in prayer, we'd have a Bible study going, and I'd say, wait a minute, folks, 8 o'clock, I'll be back in an hour. And I would go upstairs and I would watch Doug Henning. Doug Henning, what he did for me, he instilled in me, and he instilled in a great many others, a belief in wonder. A belief in wonder, folks, that's what magic is all about. It's about creating a sense of wonder. And Doug Henning did that like nobody else in history. And I love Doug Henning for it. I will always love Doug Henning for it. Coming in at number 2, Doug Henning. Number 3, David Copperfield. Now, I consider David Copperfield as an illusionist. Now, I'm not going to compare him to people who do coin manipulations or cups and ball workers or street workers or whatever. I mean, it's different categories. But as an illusionist, I think he is without compare in the history of magic. He truly is. And I grew up watching his specials. I watched every year. I couldn't wait for the David Copperfield special to see what grand illusion he was going to do, what great, amazing thing he was going to do. I remember when he walked through the wall of China. I remember the buzzsaw illusion that split him in half for the first. I mean, if you can go back, it was a little bit like Psycho. You know, when Janet Leigh was killed in Psycho, man, she was a star. She was an A-list star. Nobody expected it. Nobody saw that coming. You know, in hindsight now, in our time now, we look back on that illusion and think, oh, okay. But back when he first did it, it was shocking. You know, the buzzsaw comes down, splits him in half, and his body is separated and turned around, and now he's staring at his feet. Oh, my goodness, it was amazing. But that's the kind of stuff that Doug Henning, that David Copperfield does. He walks through the wall of China. That was an amazing illusion. And of course, my favorite was flying. The year that he flew, I said to myself, that is the greatest illusion of all time. David Copperfield sets the bar when it comes to grand illusion. He sets the bar. You know, you aspire to be like David Copperfield when you want to be a grand illusionist. He sets the standard. So, David Copperfield. Coming in at number 4, Denny Haney. You've heard me talk about Denny so much. Denny Haney. Well, I was going to Lou Walston's Funhouse Magic Shop when I met him. And for some reason, I don't know the reason, for some reason he took me under his wing. This was long before he had the shop. He was a performing professional. He was a busy man, but he took me under his wing. I spent hours in his living room watching Doug Henning videos that he had recorded, David Copperfield videos that he'd recorded, and we analyzed them, and we talked about them, and we talked about what made it good, how it could be improved, how it could be done. We talked about the theatrical arts as we watched these videos, and he taught me. He taught me. And then later, of course, he opened his magic shop. He became my dealer. I didn't deal with anybody else. There was no penguin magic. There was no vanishing magic. I didn't deal with anybody else. I dealt with Denny. And I think that's important for a brick and mortar shop. You need to deal with your local brick and mortar shop. You really do. But Denny, at first he was my friend, and then he became my mentor, and I wouldn't be the man I am today, let alone the magician I am today, if it had not been for Denny Haney. So Denny, I owe you a debt of gratitude. And maybe you should be on top of this list because you're that important. The importance of Denny Haney to me cannot be overstated. Number 4, Denny Haney. Number 5, Richard Osterlind. Richard Osterlind. Let me tell you a little story. So my ambition is to do Grand Illusion. That's what I want to do. And in the early days, I went through a lot of people. I used my sister-in-law. I used people from church. I used anybody who would volunteer to work with me. I used as an assistant. Then one day, Jill Kennard comes along. And she was everything I ever dreamed of in a partner, an assistant. Somebody that I could team up with. We worked together for over 10 years. And we built a show, a tiny little fledgling illusion show. Now, it's very hard to build an illusion show. You got to pay for those props, or you got to build them yourself. But you got to get them. Then you got to get a truck to transport them to the show. But that's what I wanted to do. That's where my passion was. And Jill shared that passion with me. She worked with me. And I love the show we had. And then it was in 1998. 1998, she gets engaged. And she decides, I'm going to focus my full attention on my marriage and on raising a family. And she resigned. She said, I'm leaving the show. And I remember placing ads in the local papers. I remember networking to try to find a replacement. I was back to square one. I auditioned people. I brought people over. We started walking through the show. It never, ever worked. I had to shift gears. I had to change. I had to find a different mode of performing. As a child, growing up at the Yogi Magic Mart, I had always admired the mentalists, the mind readers. Phil Thomas used to say to me, you're too young. And of course, at the time I was 10, 11, 12. You're too young. No one's going to take you seriously as a mind reader. Well, there are a lot of child mind readers today that are doing quite well. So I don't know that that's necessarily true, but he was Phil Thomas, and I believed anything he told me. So I didn't focus on mind reading. I focused on something else. But here I am, 38, 39, 40 years old. And I have to shift gears. I can't do illusions anymore. I can't get anybody to work with me in the show. So I decided I'm going to focus on mind reading, mentalism. And I purchased, I think it was Mental Miracles Made Easy or something like that. Easy to Master Mental Miracles. It was a series of maybe 4 DVDs by Richard Osterlind. And I sat there and I watched these, and I read 13 Steps to Mentalism, and I read Anneman's Practical Mental Effects, and I read all those books. But it was Richard Osterlind. I got to watch him perform. I got to watch him teach, and his material just became part of my repertoire. And I remember the first show I did, I used some Al Coran stuff, I used some Anneman stuff, but I also used some Richard Osterlind material. And Richard Osterlind has become so important to me. Recently, I had the opportunity to do my first trade show. Well, my first official, I've done trade shows before, but this was the first time I was actually hired as an entertainer or magician to present company product at a trade show. I knew Richard Osterlind had done it. So I reached out to him, and I asked for advice, and he liberally gave it to me. He gave it to me. So, you know, Richard Osterlind, if you haven't checked him out, check him out. He is a great teacher. He is a great performer, and he is a great human being. That's why he's on this list. Richard Osterlind. Number 6, Eugene Burger. Eugene Burger. Let me tell you why. Eugene Burger focuses on story and context. So do I. If you saw my show, you would say, David, you're telling stories, you're providing history, you're doing all this and this effect. Yeah, I embed, most of what I do is embedded in a story or historical event or something of that nature, and that comes from Eugene Burger. So Eugene Burger, thank you so much. Coming in at number 7, Rob Zabrecki. Rob Zabrecki. I'm going to try to put links to some of these folks down below, because if you haven't seen them, I don't want you to have to struggle, but if you just put his name up there in YouTube, you're going to see some fantastic magic. But let me tell you why he's on this list. And so here's something that I've never said on camera before. I'm going to say it now. I am, in my heart of hearts, a goth. Heart of hearts. Something you don't know about me. In the, when was it? In the early 2000s, I produced goth gatherings. I did. I produced goth gatherings. I would be the person who brings people together for concerts and events, weekend-long activities, and I did that. And so there's a part of me that is fully an unholy goth, and you know, that is really muted in my later years here. It's really muted. But in Rob Zabrecki, it's right there on the surface. He is a dark culture person. And what I like about him so much, if you watch his videos, if you watch him perform, the audience laughs. They laugh, they have a great time, because he takes this persona, which is a very dark persona, but he's able to present in such a way that audiences get comfortable with him. They like him. He's a likable, dark persona. And so what do I draw from Rob Zabrecki? I draw the notion, the idea, the demonstration that dark culture can be palatable to a mainstream audience if it's done correctly. And he certainly does. So I highly recommend him to you, particularly if you have a bizarrist bend, or if you're slightly dark culture as I am. Take a look at what Rob Zabrecki's doing. He's doing some incredible work. Coming in at number 8, Tyler Rabbit. Now, unless you guys are really paying attention, Tyler Rabbit might have just shot on by you. But let me tell you, this guy, he's another dark culture person. I don't know if he's goth or not, but he's another dark culture person. But what he does, this is one of the things I love so much in magicians, is their ability to focus and then create such beauty with that focus. Tyler Rabbit is a coin magic specialist. I wouldn't necessarily put him in there with David Roth. Maybe I would. I'm not sure. But what I like about Tyler Rabbit is that he's got this incredible persona as a performer. And he's capable of doing stage, parlor. I usually see him in parlor or close-up situations. That's his comfort zone. So he's typically in a parlor, Magic Castle, for example, or a close-up situation such as table hopping. But his focus is almost entirely coin magic. And so he demonstrates that you can focus on a specialty area and take that specialty area to the level of high art. That's what Tyler Rabbit does. That's what he means to me. If you haven't watched him work, I recommend that you do. Coming in at number 9, Carissa Hendrix. Carissa Hendrix, also known as Lucy Darling. You know, when I watched her perform for the first time, I think I had a smile on my face the entire time, and I had some genuine laughs too. But and I watched her and I thought, well, that's a very interesting character. And then I found out she did a penguin lecture where she did a number of different characters in the penguin lecture. So what we're talking about here when we talk about Carissa Hendrix is a talented actress who took up a passion for magic and brought that talent for acting into her magic. You know, Robert Houdin famously said, an actor, a magician is an actor playing the part of a magician. Well, Carissa Hendrix embodies that better than anybody else I've ever seen. Truly, truly does. She's a wonderful technical magician. She is a brilliant actress. She's a great comedian. And if you want to look at someone as an example of what the entertainment art can be of magic, look at Carissa Hendrix. She is knocking it out of the park, I'm telling you. Coming in at number 10, my final pick. And this was hard. This was so hard because there were so many people I would have loved to have included on this list. But coming in at number 10, Joe Bruno. Those of you who are local to Baltimore, you know who Joe is. He is our patriarch. Let me tell you about Joe. So this is around the time that I first met Denny at the Funhouse Magic Shop. I was back from seminary. I was trying to get work, and I was trying to settle in, and I meet Denny, and he's helping me out, and I meet Joe Bruno. And Joe is, at the time, he is associated with the Society of American Magicians Assembly 6, the Keller Thurston Assembly, and the assembly is meeting in his basement. So he invites me over, and I remember becoming a part of. And back in those days, folks, let me tell you something. When you became a member of the Society of American Magicians, in those days, and this was, to be specific, it was the mid to late 80s. In those days, you took an oath. You took an oath that you weren't going to expose. You took an oath about the ethics of magic. You took an oath, and you took an oath in front of all those people sitting there in that basement. And you meant it. And then you had to do 15 minutes of magic. And then the membership voted on you. And that's how you became a member of Assembly 6. And Joe Bruno was there, and George Dempsey, and many other Baltimore great magicians were there and part of Assembly 6. So Joe opened up his home. He generously opened up his home to Assembly 6 year after year after year. I remember in the summertime going over there for a pool party and barbecue. Joe opened up his home. Joe has written many books. He's done, I don't know how many parades in the Linking Ring magazine. Tons of parades. He has liberally shared. I remember trying to, when I was developing my act, George Dempsey taught me how to do the Professor's Nightmare the correct way. I mean, everybody knows how to do it, but do you know how to do it the correct? George Dempsey taught me. And then Joe Bruno taught me the Color Monte. I'm not going to reveal details, but we modified the cards and we modified the handling, and it's an amazing trick in Joe Bruno's hands. And he taught me many other things that became part of my act back in those days. So my final salute is to Mr. Joe Bruno for his generosity in sharing his home, sharing his wisdom, providing for those of us who are aspiring magicians the opportunity to learn and grow. If it weren't for people like Joe Bruno, the magical arts would probably die on the vine. Joe Bruno is the backbone of magic. And he's still with us, thank God, and he is our patriarch, and we love him to death here in Baltimore. So, Frog Super, I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you so much for asking. Hey, if you haven't subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. And please comment down below. I love your comments. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a great day.